G'day, Dons fans, and welcome back to Don the Stat. We're 2 rounds in, and it's been about as tough a start to a season as we can remember. Back-to-back 10-goal losses to open 2026, a 62-point loss in round 1, followed by a 63-point loss to Port Adelaide in round 2. It feels every bit as heavy as it sounds. What's probably hit hardest isn't just the margin, it's how the game has looked. Outworked, outplayed, and at times, like the opposition, could do pretty much what they want. The reality is we're just 2 weeks in, and this week presents an opportunity not to fix everything overnight, but to respond. We head into round 3 against North Melbourne, who are coming off a loss to West Coast, but have shown signs of improvement, particularly around clearance and contest. I'm Jonathan Walsh, and joining me to unpack things, as always, is my co-host, Nate Humey. Again, a bit of a silly question, but how's things, mate?
Look, Jono, it certainly has not been a fun week. I went back and looked at the history of Essendon, and this year is the first year in its history that Essendon has started the year with consecutive 10-goal losses. So not a great record there to set at the start of this year. And look, it's been a hard week with everything that's been going on, with the media going so hard and the AFL fans really getting stuck in. I think I was sent that picture of that Essendon guy at the teacher strike more than 10 times on Tuesday. So it is been hard to escape the Bombers after how things are going. Still, look, there's always next week, and we do have an opportunity to turn the ship around against a team we've had plenty of recent success against in the Kangaroos. How are you doing there, Jono?
Yeah, I've been sent that picture about 3 or 4 times, mate, and each time it came with the caption, "Is that Humey?" ? So we can categorically rule out that wasn't you. Yeah, look, I'm good, mate. I've been really lucky to have a very, very busy and rewarding week with work. So I don't watch a lot of football programming, but you know, social media normally gets me sucked in with what's happening. I've barely seen any of it, so. Yeah, it's probably been a really fortunate week to be really, really busy. And yeah, I'm going well, and I'm actually looking forward to getting to the footy on Saturday night. So yeah, I'm doing well, mate.
Yeah, me too. Before we get into tonight's show, as always, like to acknowledge the Patreon community. It's been a bit of an oasis in what has been a real storm of news and views and values and whatever you want to throw at it. Everyone's had their 2 cents and more. But thanks for those who have joined our community this week in Chris, Colin's family, John, AS, Sam D, Natalie Tyler, Aidan Aldridge, Evan Perkovich, and Ryan Casuano. I also want to give a huge thanks to Josh Wilson, who filled in for you for one of the games last year, one of the previews, for recording a chat with me about Essendon's game style so far this year after some of the things that he posted in our Patreon chat. Also want to give a big shout out to Blake Settle. He brought up the CBA spreadsheet, the centre bounce attendance spreadsheet that I was doing back in 2020 and had time to do a game. He was really keen to get that data again. So he's gone ahead and done it for the first 2 games of this season. So big thanks to him for getting that back online, because it's information that we can't find easily anywhere else. And so it's great just to have that as a reference point. So big thanks there to Blake as well. Got a couple more special things in store for the Patreon as well, so do keep your eyes out midweek.
Yeah, it's great to see the community continue to grow. So firstly, as you said, Humey, thanks to everyone who's jumped on this week. Mike Reid, who has been a big supporter of us and does a lot of work with data for us to help us behind the scenes. He also shared some great reports on list age demographics and just going beyond average ages, but actually the time on ground played by players in certain age brackets. And it really does give a great understanding of where we really sit in the competition and the gap that we have to close. I've been pretty inactive this week for the reasons that I spoke about before, but yeah, I'm actually a little bit proud that we've created a space where others can share their views and their expertise and their knowledge. I think, you know, you put some of that stuff up on social media and unfortunately it gets labelled as excuses or becomes cannon fodder. But in that environment, it really does help for people to bounce ideas and their thinking. And it's been really nice to see that this week. So thanks to everyone who's been part of that.
Absolutely. Well, look, we had to rip one bandage off last episode. We're going to have to rip off another one. If we keep having to rip bandages off, we're going to be left with no skin by the end of the season. So hopefully some reviews after this are not as bad as what we're having to deal with here. But that's enough beating around the bush. We'll get stuck into it because, look, they say time heals all wounds, but to be sitting here 5 days, as I said, after our second 10-goal loss to start the season, the pain is still pretty strong. Obviously, after what happened against the Hawks, we were all hoping to see some improvement this week. And to come out with that sort of first quarter that we saw against the Power, to use a term that's now in vogue, was really demoralising as a fan, not just for the the players, as Brad Scott suggested there. It's another game here we were just smashing all areas to the ground. The opposition was able to do whatever they liked. It's almost a game where it's hard to review because everything went wrong.
Yeah, it's not pretty reading, but it's a similar pattern to game one or the game in round one, although in this case we kicked the first goal. I think probably the difference is we were competitive and for longer periods throughout the Hawthorn game, whereas, in this game against Port, it was really a full sort of 120 minutes where we were below par. But yeah, post that first goal through to the quarter time siren, so we're talking about 20, 22 minutes of playing time. It was 6-4 to 1 behind. We lost contested possession 22 to 11, marks 27 to 11, disposals 68 to 45. Intercepts were 9 to 7 in Port's favour. Port had 8 of their 9 intercepts in the midfield. 5 of ours were in defensive 50. So yeah, again, Port were winning the ball back higher up the ground than we were able to. And again, all the talk is on our ability to defend, and that's not an unfair view. That our ability to defend needs to improve. It needs to improve quickly, and it needs to improve a lot. But again, we pull it back, and the pattern continues to emerge, and that is when we lose contest and clearance, we're forced to defend from deep in our own back 50. We haven't been too bad overall at winning the ball back in our own defensive 50, proportionate to the number of times that it's going back there, but it kind of then becomes a bit boom or bust on transition. It hasn't been a bad scoring avenue for us overall in the first 2 games, but in the times where we don't obviously get the ball to the other end of the ground, we're giving it back too close to the opposition's goal. So in that period where 20 minutes of play time where Port kicked 6 goals to 1 behind, 4 of those goals were from turnover. 3 of them happened in the midfield, 1 in forward 50. So none of them were coast-to-coast goals. The other 2 goals, 1 was from a centre bounce, 1 was from a forward stoppage.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, as you sort of said there, there's a lot of talk about our ability to defend. There's a lot of talking about what the coach's message are and what the game plan is. But for me, the way in which that first quarter played out, I think really exposed a lack of leadership from our experienced players. We've got players who have experience, but their ability to demonstrate that experience on the field and really show the younger guys the way to do things and use their voice to really talk about where players need to be and what they need to be doing really was exposed on the weekend, because it is hard to stop momentum in football in this day and age. I think we've seen that even the best sides can have a run on against them, but it does seem like, to me at least from the outside, there's not enough players in the side at the moment that are willing to take a stand and try to change things when momentum goes against us. It does. I think Brad alluded to it in his press conference, but it does seem like there's a lot of players in our side that go into self-preservation mode when things get tough, and not enough people willing to take a stand and show the younger players what they need to do in order to turn things around. And that also could just be a part of the history of Essendon over the past 20 years, in that the players that we've got out there now haven't learnt those things that you would expect that they would need from other players. So it's just been one of those things that's been consistently passed down from generation of player to generation of player. And it's a really hard thing, at least from what I can see, to be able to turn that around internally. I'm sure they recognise it. I'm sure they want to do it, and they think they're going about it the right way. But to actually do it is another matter. And I think it still seems a long way off from this team at the moment.
Yeah, look, it does. I think it's not a new problem and not something that should catch any of us by surprise. We've struggled for quality leaders and have for quite some time. But yeah, they're not made overnight. We went into this season knowing it was a problem. Teams are getting run-ons on us and have for a couple of years now. And that's where, we're not necessarily playing bad footy from minute 1 to minute 120. What's happening fundamentally is when we have some momentum, we're not scoring. And when we give up momentum or the opposition have it, we're allowing the opposition to score too easily and too readily. I mean, that's a pretty basic view, but really that's the difference between where we're at and where leaders really come into their fore is making sure you maintain composure when you have momentum, and then making sure that you slow down opposition's momentum when the pressure's really on, whether that's through helping to set up and defend properly, whether that's through making sure you get numbers back so you have an outnumber when you're under siege, whether it's making sure you get some ball control when you need it, or it's a young player making a mistake and getting over to them and patting them on the back and telling them to get on with it. We're a member of our leadership group down in Nick Martin, and he's probably the one that we do have who has shown signs of being able to put the team on his back and try and turn a situation to our advantage. So, yeah, it is a problem for us. It's not one that we're going to solve this year. I think we just need to keep getting games into these young guys, and we've recruited guys who are known to be strong junior leaders. So, Zach Johnson's a great example of that. Dyson Sharp's a really good example of that as well. So we've got some emerging ones, but they need to get to 40, 50, 60 games before they're going to be really able to step up and change games like we needed against Port Adelaide and Hawthorn.
Yeah, indeed. Look, it's been a criticism of Essendon for a little while now, in which the speed in which we move the ball, and our favourite champion data analyst has been hypercritical of Essendon over the last couple of years about the way in which we use the ball. And it does seem like there's been a big shift in wanting to get that quicker ball movement. And what's that's resulted in is probably an over-reliance on handball this year. Currently, our average kick to handball ratio is 1.06, which is just over one kick per handball we take. Now, there is a way to be a high handball side and still be successful. So Freo, the Suns and the Swans are all some of the better teams this year, and they have a low kick to handball ratio so far this year, but ours is way too low. We haven't really had, we are trying to move the ball by hand, and I think it's not necessarily the sort of pass it around by hand as much as it has been in previous years. It does seem like there has been an effort to make it a much more of a forward handball game. But what we're also really lacking at the moment is sometimes just to take that kick that just sort of takes the heat out of the game and gives us a little chance to set up, not to stop the game completely, but just to take some of the pressure off the ball carrier and the like. And so we're missing that at the moment because our kick to handball ratio is so low. It's also playing out in reverse, and we're allowing our opponents to kick a whole lot more against us than they do against other sides. So far this year, teams who have faced Essendon have averaged over 2 kicks per handball. So that's extremely high. And that's flowing on into the amount of marks. You've probably heard people talk about the amount of marks Essendon's conceding. Part of that is because we're allowing oppositions to kick so much. We're not putting enough pressure on the ball carrier and blocking their kicking options to force them into those handball chains, which can lend to those handball errors there. So I guess it's, we're clearly trying to be a fast ball movement side after being one of the slowest in previous years, but it's really falling apart quite a lot at this stage, and it's having flow-on effects to other parts of the game.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're handballing as much as we are by design. I think that's a byproduct of a lack of cohesion. There's a lot of guys out there that just haven't played a lot of footy together. They don't know what to expect of one another, and that also brings in confusion. It induces some panic. And then we're also having to move the ball from our own defensive 50 so regularly. We're conceding a lot of deep entries. So, I think that's situational rather than design. I shared last week that I always start with the parts of the game or periods of the game where things do work and identify what good looks like that way. Because, even in a game like Port Adelaide, there were some patches of the game where we did have a bit of momentum and things did go our way. So I think when you analyse that, you get a better picture of what the, dare I say it, system or game plan is meant to be like, rather than just looking at the numbers over a whole course of a game. Because we know the game went poorly, so looking at the totality of it doesn't really tell us much in terms of what's intended. So there wasn't a lot of good on Sunday, but we had a 15-minute window or thereabouts in the fourth quarter where we outscored Port 5-2 to 2-2. It was our best patch in the game. 5 goals in 15 minutes isn't something that we've done a lot of this season or in recent years. We actually kicked 61% of the time in that period. The AFL average is 58.8 this season. Port and the Crows are the top 2 teams ranked for kick percentage at 67. Melbourne and Brisbane are next at 64. And then there's no other team above 61 season to date. So if we take that 15 minutes and we sort of say, okay, this is what good is meant to look like. This is probably the style, the way that our coaches want our players to play and execute, then we're looking at sort of being around about the 5th ranked team for kick to handball ratio. So I do think that the intention is to kick the ball more. I think we heard from and have read from people that watched training a lot more than we did that there was a lot of focus in preseason and moving the ball by foot. So I think that gives a bit of an insight of what we're wanting. We're wanting to move the ball faster, yes, absolutely, but by foot rather than by hand. I think the hand balling, really is about releasing the kicker into a better position. We just haven't executed that often enough. And then when you're in under pressure, the instinct is to to handball to try and free someone up. And we're seeing those sort of in close handball chains that don't really go anywhere. And then more often than not, a quick kick that sort of gets turned over. So, yeah, I think sort of close that out. Kicking is the intent. Faster ball movement is the intention. By foot is the intention. I think the handball is just a design of collapsing a little bit under pressure.
Yeah, indeed. And I think one of the things that flows on is a causation why we're not kicking as much is just that lack of movement ahead of the ball. And, long-time listeners of Don the Sat are probably going to think we're a broken record because it's something we bring up a lot. But watching the game, obviously it wasn't there live, but we were quite fortunate to get quite a lot of behind the goals vision, particularly as we were exiting from D50. It was really noticeable just how often we were exiting on slow plays such as kick-ins, just how easy it was for Port to set up their defence because we weren't really trying to stretch them. We weren't forcing them to make choices to follow our players. And part of that is how to do with how our opponents are setting up against us. But we're really reluctant to get the ball into a dangerous position, leaving defensive 50, which, to be fair, is understandable given how much we're turning it over. But that's also making it easier for our opponents to defend and limit where we can move the ball to.
Yeah, look, you watched that part of the replay a lot closer than I did, so I'll defer to your comments there. But it's just something that hasn't got better over the last couple of years. And again, we're investing in improving our forward line, aren't we? We're basically building a forward line now around Caddy and Kako as our two prime pieces of that forward line. And we'll get to selection shortly, but we've brought Day Wicks into that mix this week. So I think until we get some truly dangerous half forwards who draw opponents with them and cause some chaos and create some uncertainty for defenders, then I think we're going to continue to have some struggles in that part of the ground. I also think Langford and Wright together is a problem. I think either one of them on their own probably works fine. I think out of necessity, we're having to play both at the moment because I think they're essentially the same forward in terms of starting positions and how they like to move. And you do see those two create a little bit of a bottleneck or a lot of a bottleneck quite frequently as well. So, yeah, it's just a part of the ground that through list management and recruitment is going to need to be evolved and improved over the next year or two.
Yeah, indeed. I guess, the focus in the media has been on the team defence and the collapse in some of the nature of the team defence and some of the individual efforts. And I think that is really valid because a team defence is only as strong as its weakest link. And if someone is not in the right spot or someone slacks off a little bit, it's really easy for football teams in the modern day to take advantage of that. And we saw that plenty of times against Port. But, just from thinking about the way in which we want to play and the way in which we'll get better, I think the ball movement is probably more important at this stage because ideally you would address both, right? You would address the ball movement and you would address the team defense at the same stage. I just think if we can get the ball movement better, it gives us better quality ball forward. It gives us more of the ability to retain the ball. So we're less having to defend because we've got the ball in hand, and gives us the chance to get those deeper entries we talk about, which give us more of a chance to either score or to really deny the opposition the ability to move the ball. So as much as the media and such are focusing on the defense, I think if we improve the ball movement, improve the ball retention without slowing down too much and sort of getting into that sort of chip around the back that we were doing for big parts of last year, I think that in itself will lead to better results at this stage than just focusing on the team defense.
Well, I mean, I think there's opportunities to do both, right, in terms of ball movement methods. Fast movement needs to be complemented by tempo is the word that we used to use back when I was involved. And that's important too. So, if you think back to the periods of the game where the opposition are sieging and really coming at us time and time again, we're trying to run our way out and blast our way out. But sometimes you just need to take an uncontested mark, set up and take a minute or two off the clock and get some composure in the game. And that's okay too. So, yeah, I think some balance in our ball movement method, I think, can really help. But I think everything just needs to improve as a whole. I think if we improve contest and clearance, we'll also improve defence. I think it's a simplistic measure because it doesn't tell the full story. Port scored 3 goals, 2 from chains that started in our forward 50. So, that's those coast-to-coast goal or scores. We scored 3-3 from chains that started in our defensive 50. So from a pure score perspective, we outscored them by 1 behind from end-to-end chains. Now, they, of course, had a lot more, or we had a lot more opportunities to do that than they did because they had a lot more inside 50s than we did. But They also move the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50 31% of the time, and that's too high. Carlton, Adelaide and Melbourne are the only other teams in the comp this year to go above 30%. AFL average is 23%. So just to be clear, that means on average across the competition, when a team wins the footy in their own defensive 50, they move the ball into their forward 50 23% of the time. So Port did it 31% of the time on us. So they didn't convert them into scores, but they converted it into territories. Yeah, I think for me, a better clearance and contest result. And that to me would be not just winning more clearances, but actually, I think if you even compare the quality of clearances we get to our opposition, we're not getting fluid ball movement out. But then, yeah, also better ball movement outcomes and some tempo ball movement at times. I think ultimately it means more deeper entries, more scores if you're scoring the opposition is it, and it exposes your defence a lot less.
Yeah, indeed. And I think as hard as it is to watch at the moment, the way in which we're trying to move the ball and things falling apart so easily, I think we need to commit to this faster ball movement for a longer period of time. It's probably going to take more than an off season to address it. As you say, some of the pieces that you would need to run a fast system that we clearly want to do aren't in place yet, and you need to go out and get them through drafting or trading or free agency. But it's clear from how the AFL has gone and what the AFL are trying to do with the rules that it's really pace on the ball is where we need to go. And that's not necessarily in terms of leg speed. It's in terms of how quickly you actually move the ball when you have it. And that can be through forward handball. That can be through kicking. And so as bad as it is, they're only going to learn by doing it. And we might have to double down on trying to move it quickly. Although, as you sort of say, a bit more through kicking than through handballing, even if it does result in us getting blown away for a time. And I guess the benefit will be in the long run is if we can increase the ball movement speed and get better with retention, as you say, we'll score more, we'll deny our opposition more turnover opportunities, and then give our defense better time to set up. So, you probably want to change the method of what we're doing, but the intent of what we're trying to do is what we really have to stick with. And I think it would do a grave disservice to the side in the long run if we reverted to a slower, safer style. Because that might stop the scoreboard from blowing out. But in the long run, it's not really going to serve us.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about recruitment and list management and bringing players in that are going to help with that. Nick Martin will help with that a tremendous amount as well because he's one that can cover the ground, run up and back, and then he's also a quality user and typically makes good decisions and good things happen when he gets the footy. So there's a missing piece there. But you're right, the intent is the right one. The execution of it is poor, but it always gets worse. It was always going to get worse before it gets better because in trying to move the ball faster, you're increasing the likelihood of risks and mistakes. And what we're seeing with that ball movement, to be honest, is the least of my concerns. It hasn't surprised me in the slightest. I think we even talked about it pre-season and preempted it. The bit that I haven't or didn't preempt, and in fact I felt really confident in going into the season and expected a much better result, is around contest and clearance. And I think that's compounding things because too often we're having to move the ball from deep in our own defensive 50 at a time where we're trying to learn how to do it in a new way, and it's just putting more and more pressure on ourselves.
Indeed. And what you just said there just flows onto something that was asked in the Patreon chat by Patreon Chris G, and I thought it would be good to actually discuss in tonight's show and get you to sort of break it down. Because if you look at the raw data, our contested possession numbers and our ground, and I added this one, but ground ball gets numbers. So the numbers you really associate with the contest are actually holding up quite well. We've been breaking even or slightly winning those numbers in, when you look at the stat sheet. But that isn't really translating to the rest of the game. So I guess just to help Chris and the rest of the listeners understand, why is the fact that we're seemingly doing so well in these areas not leading to better results there?
Yeah, I think just to clear a couple of things up, we're ranked 18th in the AFL for clearance differential, and we're minus 2.5 for contested possession per game. So yeah, we're still, differential numbers where we're getting well beaten. Ground balls, we're plus 3 per game, but we rank, so that's differential, but we rank 17th for ground ball gets because we're conceding so many uncontested marks. Our games don't have a lot of ground balls to be with. So when there are ground balls, we're winning more than our share, but we're not playing in matches yet, sample size of 2. So yeah, the numbers aren't great. I think they're central to what is happening when teams get a run on. We aren't scoring enough when we do get contest momentum because the ball movement, yet isn't clean enough to get the quality looks. and we're not getting the ball out of clearance cleanly, and then the opposition scores heavily when they do win contest and clearance. So, yeah, we shared the example last week of what the Hawks did in a couple of runs of play when they had momentum. Port was similar, and the same patterns emerged. So it's probably not just the overall results of clearance and contest across the whole game. I think it's the damage teams are doing when they have momentum and we're not able to wrestle it back and do the same level of damage when we do get it.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, it's been a tough chat. We haven't really focused on the game too much, just more the general themes that have come out of it. But let's round off the Port review by focusing on some of the positives. And it really comes from the young players, as you would hope for the future of the club. And the couple of forwards on the weekend that really stood out in Nate Caddy and Isaac Kako. So I guess amongst the day, it was really only when those two got the ball you felt any sort of excitement, with Caddy managing to kick a career-best 4 goals from 7 scoring shots, and Isaac Kako kept generating opportunities and really had that pace on the ball that meant that he was a danger any time he got near it. He'll be better for the run. You'd hope he would kick straighter in the future, but to generate, I think, 5 scoring shots from him on his comeback game from his injury again was really exciting.
Yeah, it was. I thought Zach Johnson had a really good game too, mate, and he hasn't played a lot of games to sort of rank them, but one of his better ones. I thought we saw some improved signs from Archie Roberts as a midfielder against a really good midfielder. I think, he's still got a way to go, but Archie still only played 25 games, and by any other stretch, expectations of a 25 game player or thereabouts would be a lot lower than the ones that we seem to be placing on Archie. I feel like we forget that he's so young in his career, and we're expecting him to play like a 100-gamer already. So yeah, again, they're the things that you hope you get when you lose and lose badly, isn't it? That you can see some glimmers of hope through what your young players and what the future might involve. I mean, Max Condogiannis didn't have a great game. He made some mistakes. He had a 5-minute run late in the first quarter where it kind of seemed like every time he went near it, he made an error and the opposition kicked a goal or he lost his opponent. And that's not criticism, by the way. That's just kids footy or young kids playing at the senior level. But what I did like about him is that he kept going and that didn't sort of waver. So yeah, I think everybody cries and screams for you to play the kids and to go to the draft and rebuild the list until you see the outcomes that come with going to the draft and playing kids and rebuilding the list. And that's the outcomes that we're getting at the moment. Everyone wants to see improved, faster ball movement until you start to see the outcomes of doing that. And that's what we're getting at the moment. I don't think we should be happy or satisfied or accepting of the losses and how we lost and the amounts that we've lost by. But I don't think we should be entirely surprised by it, because I think the position that we've put ourselves in this season, having to play so many young players and expose them so early at such a young age, is largely by design. I think, that we could have Sam Draper, Jake Stringer, Jaden Laverde in this team, among a couple of others, and we would probably be better for it in terms of 2026 results. We probably wouldn't have won the last 2 games, but we probably would have been more competitive for longer and had a better scoreboard result. But I'm not sure it would have got us any closer, and in fact probably a little bit further away from where we want to be. So yeah, I think largely what we're seeing now in terms of on game day is just this byproduct of peeling the list back and getting as many young blokes in and games into them as quickly as possible. And for me, that's exactly what we should be doing.
Yeah, indeed. I guess just sort of building on that and your experience at Essendon, you obviously had some really good times at Essendon, but you're also at the club during one of its worst losing streaks back in 2006. I guess just from your experience, what does a prolonged period of losing do to a state?
Yeah, from memory, that was a period too where we had, Hurdy didn't play a lot of footy that year. Lloydie didn't play a lot of footy that year. So we were, we were struggling for on-field leaders in that period too. I mean, we had the benefit of having some premiership players still from that 2000 era. I think, Scotty Lucas kicked a lot of goals in 06 from memory, and Mark Johnson had a good year. So we weren't in the situation that we're in now so much, but it did sort of highlight the challenges that you get yourself into when you're having to play a lot of younger players and you don't have too many on-field leaders. I think footy clubs can be the best place to be and the worst place to be. They can be really dark places when you're not winning. I know it drives fans mad, but it's why you hear your coaches avoid making wholesale changes, because as soon as you do that, you make your problems worse. People start to really doubt and question themselves. You're trying to build some cohesion to try and get some stepping stones and building blocks towards wins, and making 5 or 6 changes at a time can really make that difficult. It's why coaches will talk a lot about process rather than outcomes. You can't will a win into existence. You can't just shout and rant and rave and tell players to go harder and work harder and these things and expect that's going to be enough. You have to really work hard to find ways to keep things positive, to bring energy into the group. You start to introduce different things and change things up. I know at times it's a different era now, but you would have a night out. You would get away for a night to a camping site and a bonfire and a couple of slabs of beer and just release the pressure valve that way. I suspect that kind of stuff doesn't happen these days, given the professionalism of the sport. Just finding ways, whether it's through guest speakers or comedians or other things that aren't necessarily about footy, to bring some energy into the group, I think can help a lot. And then you just have to focus on the things you can control, and they're the small things, how you recover, how you plan, how you prepare, the food that you're eating, those kinds of things, that you make them the focus, and then just some simple metrics within games around contest or tackles or whatnot, and build the process, and ultimately, if you can do that better week on week, good things you would hope start to come. So I think if you focus just on win-loss, when the losses pile up, it really does become a big dark hole to have to dig yourself out of. So you have to find other things to celebrate until the wins eventually come. But thanks for taking me back into those moments, mate. I appreciate that. We'll move on. You've kept a close eye on the media this week. What did you find? I suspect it wasn't too hard to find nominees for the Damien Barrett Lifetime Achievement Award this week.
That's it. It's almost a full-time job to sift through all the muck and dreck that is coming up. And there's been some really bad stuff this week as the Flyers travel to the poo to feast on the carcass of Essendon season already. Look, shout out to Scooter from the Lunchtime Catch-Up podcast who nominated Mark Duffield from SENWA and his ignorance of Essendon's drafting strategy. But this one from earlier in the week from Caro and Nick Rewalt was too good to pass up. On agenda setters, both made the claim that Ben Mackay hasn't lived up to expectations. They did in the context of highlighting some defensive positioning issues he had against Port Adelaide. But once again, it was sort of a lazy throwaway line. So people who are not really thinking beyond 5 minutes ago, because I want to take you back to Essendon before we recruited Ben Mackay, and one of the big complaints that people had and criticisms of Essendon was their inability to really lock down on the best key forwards. It was almost a semi-regular occurrence that opposition key forwards would get hold of us and kick bags of goals. So if you look at the season before Mackay came to Essendon in 2023, Danaher, Lucky, Hogan and Hawkins twice kicked 5 or more goals in the game, and this is in an era obviously where key forwards aren't kicking big bags of goals like they did in the 80s and the 90s. Mackay was injured last year. Cameron, Norton, Darcy and Ben King did it. In the games that Mackay played in 2024 and 2025, no key forward kicked a bag of goals of 5 or more. If you count Gunston as a key forward, he did that in round 1 this year, so that was the first key forward, but if you're being technical, he's more of a mid-size forward there. Ben Mackay was top 5 for intercept possessions in 2024. He's currently top 10 this season off a short sample size. That's in the competition. He only costs us money to bring in and a list spot. He's not even taking up a huge chunk of the salary cap anymore. Most of his deal was front-ended. Before Ben, we were trying to run Jane Laverty, Brandon Zerk-Thatcher and James Stewart as key defenders. I think Ben Mackay was exactly the sort of player we needed at the time we brought him in. And so far, I think for the most part, he's done the job we need him to do. And if we can start tightening up the ground defence and sort of slowing down their opposition entries, I think we'll see him play an even bigger role, because there's not many better intercept marks in the competition. If we give him time to set up and zone off, he's going to be a real weapon for us in defence.
Yeah, look, I haven't heard or seen the comments, so I can kind of imagine what they might have been like. But yeah, I'd like to see Ben get a little bit more physical and a bit more aggressive with his positioning, back to what he was doing in 2024, because I thought his first year at the club was a real big step forward. He does look a bit lost at the moment, and Zach Reid does too, for that matter. So I think isolating Ben Mackay, I suspect, is just driven to deliver headlines, which is what they do, right? because, I think it's a problem for both of our key backs at the moment. They're not sure whether to press up and be aggressive in their positioning or sit back. And I think that's what the pressure of losing and also having momentum go against you does. You're right. Key forwards kick bags of goals for fun against us pre Ben Mackay coming to the club. It hasn't really happened when he's played. I think, I'm backing him in to continue to play some really good footy for us. I think he's the least of our worries at the moment. But yeah, what else caught your eye this week, mate?
Well, the media certainly really targeted Brad Scott this week, and Brad, was quite open at his post-game press conference after the Port game, particularly around the comment about the side being demoralised. As I said, it was one of the more open and honest press conferences we've seen from a coach. It was refreshing in a way because it really reflected what we've seen out in the field. Now, it's his job as coach to fix that issue, and if he can't fix that, then it does have to, do have to question his long-term viability as coach of Essendon. But at least they're not really shying away from the problems that they're facing there. He also copped some criticism for singling out Nate Caddy's miss from close range as a moment from the match. It was really the only player that he brought up in talking about the whole team's effort. And I heard it more as the way in which something like that particular moment can really drop the heads of the side rather than being criticism of Nate himself. But others have suggested that it was directed at him and it was unfair to single him out when he was arguably our best performer on the day. How do you see the comment? And is it the sort of thing that can really drive a wedge between player and coach?
Yeah, truth be told, I only listened to it in full today, mate. So I sort of read some of the reporting of it and commentary and conversation about it before I actually heard the press conference in full. If I can just go... Sorry. If I can just go back one sec. I mean, we're only 2 games in and some other teams are 3 games in, but Ben Mackay is actually had the 4th or averaging the 4th most intercept marks for key defenders in the competition so far this year. So, there's a part of his game that despite not playing his best footy is actually going okay. And he is getting his hands on the footy at times and in and amongst the likes of Tom Barrass and Sam Collins, who are lauded for that part of the game. But yeah, I wanted to drop that in. But coming back to those, I think when I read the reporting of it and saw some of the current commentary, my instinct was to be a little bit disappointed by it. But I did wonder, and I think I made the comment in our Patreon chat, whether, I know coaches that I've been involved in the past will use players as examples that they know can handle it. And sometimes it's conversations they've already had. I'm going to go to the media and say this, and I'm going to put you out there, but this is what I mean. Or just in front of the playing group, knowing that they're a player that can handle that sort of confrontation and feedback. So I also, in the back of my mind, wondered whether he's done it knowing that Nate is a player that could handle that, and maybe it was a conversation that they'd already had. And so I listened to it in full today. Don't think at all, having listened to it, that he was being critical of Nate. I thought it was just an example, or him giving an example of what could happen in a game of footy to your mindset and the impact of it, and just how we need to get some of those silly errors out of our game because they can compound into bigger things. And then listen to Brad Scott's press conference from today, where he explained it exactly that way. He then also explained that he'd spoken to Nate and the playing group about it. So to be honest with you, I mean, it's a bit of a rhetorical statement. I was going to say I don't really know what the fuss is all about, but I also know that that's the way the industry works, and they make a fuss about lots of things. I was chatting on Tuesday night, Humey, to a big supporter of the show, James Lowry, and he made the comment and described the AFL media cycle like this. Early in the week or on the weekend, you get 1 or 2 journos who will go with a line or make a big grand statement about something, whether it's a coach, a player, a team, whatever it is. Then you get every other journo across the week commenting about that story. So they're no longer actually talking about the game or something that happened in the game or anything, but they're talking about a story that was created by another journalist, and then it just becomes fodder for the week. And I think you've also made the point too that most of the big name AFL journalists appear on radio, print, and on the television. So they then have 3 cracks at keeping the story that they've created alive throughout the course of the week, and we just go in this vicious cycle. So when I say I don't really know what the fuss is about, I guess I understand the way the world works, and yeah. I'm over it. We had some mixed news on the injury front, mate. Shall we, have a bit of a chat about that?
Yeah, indeed. And as you said, mixed news. I mean, Mason Redman we saw go down against Port with a knee injury. And then if you watch the VFL game on Friday night before the Port game, we saw Vigo Vicentini disappear at quarter time. And both of them do look like they're now out for 2 months with the injuries sustained this weekend's matches. We spoke about leadership earlier in the show, and I thought of all the people in the name leadership group, I thought Mason was probably the player that had played most to the expected standard from a leader. Still probably not at the level we really need, but he was probably the one that was most consistent across those first 5 quarters for him. So it's a big blow to lose him for a couple of months. And also with Vigo, ruck depth was already shallow going into the year, and this is just another challenge for the side, especially since he was actually looking quite good in the VFL going up against Reece Stanley, who was just coming back through the VFL for Geelong. And once Vigo went off in that VFL game, we really got run over the top of. So arguably he was keeping us in that game until he went off. So, again, he's young and we probably shouldn't be expecting much from him at AFL level. But given that we've made the choice to go into the season with such limited ruck depth, to have Vigo go out at this stage does leave us sort of on the precipice there, really relying on Blackiston and Wright at the moment until Brian is ready to go.
Yeah, I think you peel it back. I mean, we've been relatively healthy year to date, haven't we? Which has been an improvement. Most of the injury absentees this year have been players that had had legacy injuries from last year and are still coming back from those. So it has been an improvement in that regard. And then, even the injuries that we have had this year, Clark, Mason himself have largely been impact injuries rather than soft tissues. I know Vigo is obviously an exception to that. But when you peel it back, when you've got such a young list, we're going into this week without, probably our second best player in Nick Martin. I think Jordan Ridley would be among the first 3 or 4 pick for most Essendon fans. And then also without our number one ruck, who granted is still a young guy anyway, in Nick Bryan and now Mason Redman. It is looking a little bit thin. So hopefully we can get some bodies back soon. But I think in more positive news, the Dyson Sharp one did look a little bit worrying on Sunday. It looks like he's been selected to play this week. Whether he does or not, I guess we'll probably wait to find out on Saturday evening. But at least he's avoided major damage. Nick Bryan has sort of jumped ahead in his recovery and now looks like he could be playing VFL footy next week or the week after, which is, exciting. As you said, with Blackiston struggling, now Vigo going down injured, we're kind of now looking at Peter Wright really as the next ruck option if we need to make a change in the ruck. So, Nick will still need 3 or 4 VFL games to get back up to speed, given he's missed 12 months. But at least we're starting to get some reinforcements back. I think Edwards will play his first game only this week in the VFL too, recovering from that ACL injury. So, it's certainly not all doom and gloom on the injury front, which is good to see. But, let's move on, mate. We've got a game to play and win this week. It's against toss of the coin for me between this mob and the mob out of Princess Park, who I most like to beat. I know very few Essendon fans would admit that we have a rivalry with North Melbourne, but for me, it's right up there amongst the biggest. And I despise this mob, so let's have a look at them.
Well, we're certainly the team that they want to beat the most. It's a yearly grand final, and that they've had 10 years of disappointment in that. So let's make it 11. Looking at North made it 6 years in a row, finishing inside the bottom 4 last year, although they had their first season with more than 4 wins since 2019. They ended the year with 5 wins and a draw and a percentage of 76.3. So small steps for North as people have continually predicted them to finally be ready to move up the ladder and still quite haven't been able to do it.
Yeah, it was actually the first time since 2019 that the percentage was above 72. So, they've spent a long time in the wilderness.
Yeah, there was, as you say, the percentage was improved from previous years, and there were small signs of improvement in North's attack and defence in 2025. They kicked 8 more points per game and reduced their opposition by the same amount. So they ranked 13th for scores for and 15th for scores against, and this was also reflected in their inside 50 differential. They still were down quite a lot to their opponents. They were minus 9.65 per game in 2025. That was 4 better than it was the previous year. So still not great, but on the improve. And once they went inside 50, their ability to score also improved quite dramatically. They went from a 42% scores per inside 50 to 49% scores per inside 50 last year.
Yeah, I do think there's a little bit of a false economy made in their scoring improvement last year because it largely came from centre bounce. And I don't think that's a method that's reliable or necessarily repeatable. They improved from 9.8 points a game in 2024 centre bounce to 14.7 in 2025. They also improved by about a goal a game from stoppage, but scores from turnover actually declined. They were ranked 17th for turnover scores last year, which was behind us, and we know that's an area that we struggled, obviously. And it was actually a goal a game worse than in 2024. However, they did make a 9-point improvement on scores from turnover against, which is an important metric for a team trying to improve their defensive output. It's also important to note that there was a big difference in their ability to score from stoppage and centre bounce in round one compared to round two this season. So, yeah, I think that it's important context on where their game improved last year, but also that there's still an inconsistency in it, and not necessarily a proven method. And the sample size of 2, but they've shown that already in 2026.
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned a lot of their scoring improvement came from centre bounce, and partly that was to do with the fact they were winning more centre bounce last year than they were previous years. They went from 11th to 7th in differential, and their stoppage work also improved from 9th to 5th. So despite that strong clearance game, their ability to win contested ball outside of clearance has struggled. So once it gets outside that clearance area, they really struggle to get their hands on it when it is in the contest. So minus 1.3 a game across all contested possession, which suggests that if they're winning clearance, it's worse on the outside of the clearance situations. Although they did improve their ability to win ground ball. We're just above break even last year as opposed to being -5 in 2024.
Yeah, and look, just to bring that into 2026, it's another area where there was a big difference between round one and round two. In their round one win, they were +11 at clearance, +20 at contested possession, +7 in ground balls, and +5 in post-clearance contested possession, and had a really good win against Port. In round two, they lost to West Coast. They were still +9 at clearance, but they were -20 in contested possession, -36 in ground balls, and -35 in post-clearance contested possession. We've talked in our 2 match reviews so far on what happens to us when we lose contest in particular and also clearance. Well, I think there's a method there against North Melbourne that shows just how important it is to their game too.
Yeah. And finally, their marks profile changed a little between 2024 and 2025. They averaged around 3 less than their opponents per game in both years, and they also struggled with their inside 50 mark differentials. They took 4 less marks inside 50 than their opponents did. And finally, they continue to have the worst intercept game in the competition. They're being ranked 18th both in 2024 and 2025 in terms of generating intercepts, and that was averaging 5.5 less than their opponents in 2025. They've really struggled to win the ball back off their opponents once they get the ball. They've really been reliant on that clearance dominance to win games, and if they can't do that or teams break even against them, that's when North has really struggled in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, that's right. And at the risk of sounding like a bit of a broken record here, you look at their 2 games this year, they took 119 marks in their round 1 win, which was 45 more than their opponent. And they broke even in their loss in round 2 with just 67 marks. Again, it's an area where we need to be mindful of. We've conceded a lot of marks in our first 2 games. North have shown that if you can restrict them in that part of the game, then you can get some ascendancy against them and get a win.
Yeah. Moving on to what's changed for the Kangaroos in terms of their list. They had 8 players depart straight into the 2025 off-season. Finbar Maley was traded to Adelaide. He played 7 games in 2025. And then 7 others were delisted, including former pick 3, Will Phillips, who played 7 games, Geordie Payne, who played 3 games, Bryn Teakle, who played 4 games last year, Asi Tako, who played 7, and one of my former legal studies students, Cal Dawson, who was a mid-season pickup a couple of years ago. He played 3 games in 2025 before being delisted.
Yeah, I know some articles this week. I didn't read them, but saw some headlines that commenting on our drafting in the 2020 draft. Well, Will Phillips was pick 3 in that draft. I think Denver Granger Barras was pick 6 or so to Hawthorn in that draft. So, yeah, already pick 3 and pick 6 in that draft are out of the AFL system and off lists. And that was also the draft that helped me out here. Humey went from the Bulldogs to Gold Coast, was pick number 1.
Yes, Jamara. Yep, Jamara's moved on. And Elijah Hollins has gone for 2 clubs and been delisted and redrafted there. So, as much as people want to point out our poor drafting in that year wasn't a great year for many people. It's just unfortunate we ended up with so many picks in that draft. Some of that was by choice and some of that was just bad luck, really.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah. In terms of the ins, Charlie Spargo arrived from Melbourne as a free agent. He missed round 1 with concussion and therefore wasn't selected for round 2 and hasn't made it back for this round yet. But based on the North Melbourne selections. Small forward Lockie Dovison was taken with pick 16 in the draft. He was talked about for one of Essendon's top 3 picks. We looked past him, and he's played both games this year, whilst other national draftees Blake Threadgold and Hugo Mukunda are yet to debut. And then Frankston VFL player Tom Lemaire was picked up as an SSP selection, and he's played both games this year as well.
Yeah, Dovison hasn't done a heap just yet, but small forwards is a tough role, and he's kicked 1 goal in his 2 games. I think he had 10 disposals in round 1 and 7 or 8 in round 2. But what he is doing is giving them a bit of spunk and energy, so he's definitely one to watch. He's a real momentum and burst player, so yeah, I guess a little bit of potentially to be a little bit of a barometer for them.
Yeah, indeed. I guess pairing him with Paul Curtis, it does give them some excitement up forward there that, we've talked a lot about on this show, the need for small forwards and the need for those quicker players to lock it in, and something North Melbourne haven't really had. So you can see why they picked him up with their first pick. Look, enough about North Melbourne. This isn't a Kangaroos podcast. Let's get on to the real deal, which is the Bombers and looking at selection. And we've got our 4th debutant of the year from the 2025 draft in Jacob Farrell, was announced today. Will be making his debut. Joining him in the side this week is Jade Gresham, Asada Hooley and Archie Day-Wicks. Outs go Redmond with his injury, and then Contagianis, Newen and Alashka, who are all omitted. There was some expectation of big names being dropped after last week's performance, but the experienced players being backed in to make up for what happened against Port Adelaide. 2 of the debutants from round 1 and Newen have made way. It was great that Kondo and Alashka have got a taste, but heading back to the VFL to keep working on their development is not a punishment for them at this stage of their careers. Both showed glimpses, but also looked a fair way off being consistent contributors at this stage. It's a big opportunity for, as I said, Jacob Farrow on debut, and congratulations to him. And I think having both him and Zach Johnson in the back half means we do have 2 quality, if inexperience kicks in our back half, which will help with the ball movement, while Sada Hooley adds the pace that we lack. So it's a real big opportunity for him to cement a position in this side. We've talked about him a lot, having those attributes that we as a side don't have, and it's up to him to sort of put it all together there. And then we had Jade Gresham, who performed really well in the VFL practice match against North, and it was probably a bit unlucky not to get named last week, although probably lucky for him he didn't play in that game. It's probably made him look better.
Yeah, look, first of all, mate, I like the ins. I feel a little bit for Elijah Sardas. I think given our clearance challenges, it's an area of the game that he's really good at, and would have liked to have seen him potentially come in for this week. But I do like the 4 for what they bring to the team. I also, Farrow, Gresham and Al Hooley were performing the best at VFL level, whether it's practice matches or the game last week. So we brought some players in that have been in good touch. Yeah, Gresham and Al Hooley in particular have had really strong pre-season, so I think they've earned their spot back in the side. Day-Wicks is one that I'm a little bit bullish on, mate. I didn't get to pre-season a lot, but the bits that I did get to, I really liked what I saw. He's a lot fitter than he was last year. I like that we've added another genuine half-forward option and a goal-scoring threat. He's someone that doesn't need a lot of touches to have an influence. He's got some power and spunk and a bit of that energy too that I think I spoke about that earlier. How do you re-energize a team that's been in the doldrums? Well, I think he's one that's got a little bit of that about him. He's got some spunk. So, yeah, hopefully we can get the ball in his hands a little bit early, and I think some good things will happen. Yeah, there's definitely some guys that can consider themselves lucky, and hopefully they earn their opportunity. I think Langford and Perkins haven't had an influence in either game, round 1 or round 2. I think Parrish had a poor second outing after a pretty decent round 1, I thought, given how long he'd been out of the team. He was probably our best player in the first quarter and a half before Hawthorn put the clamps on him and sort of took him out of the game. So, I'd probably give him a bit of an excuse, or not an excuse, but on balance, he probably, gets a chance to redeem himself because he was pretty solid in round 1. But yeah, I don't really have a problem with the other outs. I shared last week that I just felt Jaden Newen was getting, a bit lost in his positioning, was getting caught behind or too far in front. I think he'll just really benefit from VFL development and spending some time out there trying to master the balance between defence and attack. He sort of came into the side last year and was able to nail the pure lockdown defensive elements. This year we're asking him to be able to give us some drive and offensive output as well. And he's just struggling like a lot of young players do to find that balance. And I think the VFL will help him. I think Huss just needs to get his hands on the footy a little bit more, build that match fitness and conditioning up. I'm sure he'll get another crack at it this year. And I'd like Kondo just to go and do what Farrow has done and just go back to the VFL, get some confidence, get his hands on the footy. And I think, again, he'll come back into the side. I think it's important this year when we've got a relatively healthy list that we don't flog these young guys either, and we do rotate them in and out. I wouldn't like to see 4 changes every week, obviously, but bringing young guys in for a block of 2, 3, 4 games, rotating them out and getting a game into or 2 into some other young blokes, I think is a way to go about it.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. And moving on to North Melbourne, they've made 3 changes. So in for them is Aidan Corr, Callum Coleman-Jones and George Wardlaw. Out are Griffin Logue, Jack Darling and Jacob Constanti. All of those were omitted. There's a couple of like-for-like changes there for North with Corr in for Logue and CCJ for Darling. Wardlaw will be interesting one for them, how much they'll use given his comeback game from injury and given what happened last time he went out on a football field. If you look at the North centre-backs attendances for the year so far, they've really relied heavily on LDU, O'Sullivan and Sheasel at centre bounce. So perhaps bringing Wardlaw in will allow them to share the load a bit more evenly and ensure those players don't get worn out.
Yeah, I did get beaten up at contest last week, so I think Wardlaw helps him out there. That's what he's great at. Probably another reason it's a bit of a shame that Elijah Sardis isn't in this team. They were teammates in their draft year, and both got strong attributes in that area. Probably where Elijah gets George is in a little bit of spread. I don't actually mind seeing Darling omitted. I was a bit nervous about that matchup and our options there. I referenced their loss a couple of times already to West Coast, mate, but do you want to give us a bit of a summary of that game?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, West Coast 17-9, 111 defeated North Melbourne 15-94. Real straight goal kicking game, this one. But, North, following on from their victory against Port, started with a 7-3 opening quarter, and they took a 24-point lead into the first break. But from there, it was pretty much all West Coast. They kicked 12 goals to 4 over the next 2 quarters. To get out to a 30-point lead. The Roos did get the margin back to 11 in the last quarter, but the Eagles managed to hold on for a 17-point win. A bit like we were talking about earlier when we were looking at North Melbourne's stats, that they won the clearances by 9, but they really struggled to keep hold of the ball. They turned it over 13 more times, and it was from those turnovers that the Eagles were really able to gain the territory that resulted in them kicking that winning score. They had 11 more inside 50s. For the Kangaroos, Harry Sheasel led the way with 40 disposals, 8 clearances, and 600 metres gained. However, for Sheasel, only 4 of those disposals actually contributed to a score. 36 of his touches didn't really damage the Eagles there. Luke Davies-Uniacke had 32 disposals and 6 clearances. And then in terms of goal scorers, Nick Larkey, the captain, led the way with 6 goals, whilst Cam Zerha and Paul Curtis both kicked 2.
Yeah, despite him having 40 disposals, mate, 17 other players were rated higher on the ground than Harry Sheasel. So, yeah, you're right. He didn't have a huge impact with the ball. It'll be interesting to see whether they might be tempted to move him to half-back or maybe Finn O'Sullivan back to half-back this week with Wardlaw back into the team, or they just back Sheasel to improve and be more effective with the ball in hand. He had a disposal efficiency of just 64 last week as a midfielder, and this season North are the 17th ranked side for transitioning the footy from defensive 50 to forward 50. We're right on the AFL average of 23%. North have transitioned from one end to the other just 15.7% of the time. So, yeah, I guess a little bit of an opening for us as a team who's struggled to defend teams moving the ball. It's not an area that North in 2 games so far this year have been good at, and in fact we're sort of doing better than them in regard. They rank 18th for defensive 50 transition into a score at just 3.7% of the time. So just 3.7% of the time they get the ball in their own defensive 50, they're able to get up the other end and score. We're ranked 7th in the AFL, which again, given, we've been critical and it's obvious that our ball movement hasn't worked at times, when we do get it right, we're showing some glimmers that we're effective at being able to get it onto the scoreboard.
Yeah. Well, look, let's get on to the match itself and probably what's going to be the biggest mismatch of the night, which will be the ruck. And Tristan Xerri is one of the top rucks in the competition. And we have seen the difficulty Blackerson has had, admittedly early on in his AFL career, but going up against the biggest rucks in the competition in these past couple of weeks. And Xerri specialises in that working close once it hits the deck as well. So he's a threat in the ruck, but he's also a threat when the ball hits the deck and really getting those clearances out. So I guess how do we handle this given the resources that we have?
Yeah, it's a challenge. He's the fifth ranked ruckman so far this season for clearances per game. So not only is it what he can do in the air, it's also what he can do at getting the ball out of congestion and getting territory for North. North also ranked number one in the competition for first possessions at clearance, or converting a first possession into a clearance this season. West Coast did restrict them, though, in that regards. First possession to a clearance just 67% of the time for full in that West Coast game. So for full context, that would have sat them 3% behind the 18th ranked team in 2025. So I think just to bring that all together, they've got a big, strong ruckman who's effective around the ground, can take a mark, but also can take the ball out of the ruck and get clearance. He's also effectively number one in the AFL for giving his midfielders, advantage by allowing them to get first possession. But when you strip that off them and don't allow them to get that clearance, and West Coast were able to do that, you're creating repeat contests in and around the ball, and that's what gave West Coast a chance. I think Blackiston overall this year he's tried to back in his strengths, which is his athleticism, his ability to jump, and what that's led to is him being really aggressive at clearance with his hits. I'd like to see him just be focused, being a little bit more combative, competitive, and defensive in going about it. Don't put the ball out into space, because we've relied too much on being perfect, and if you try to be perfect and you get it wrong, you get torn up like Port did to us last week. I think we want to make it a bit more of a scrap, because I think, relying on perfect makes it just way too hard to defend when you don't get it right.
Yeah, indeed. And then moving on from that and where this ruck battle leads to, it's an area we've struggled at much this year in terms of clearance. I guess what can we do differently, especially considering we're up against a side that has numerous good clearance winners and is generally a good clearance side. I talked about the data that Blake has put together for us, and looking at those numbers so far, Archie Roberts, even though he's quite new at this being a midfielder, he has our worst centre clearance win rate over the first couple of rounds. So do we persist with him in this area, or do we try someone else? And then I look at North Melbourne, and you see Wardlaw come in, and he's obviously really good in this area of the ground. But the one player that gives me pause from them is Luke Davies-Uniacke, because he has typically performed well against us these past couple of games, even though Essendon has won. Do we really have a matchup that can limit him if he gets on a roll?
Well, I mean, arguably Caldwell and Durham, if we went that way, have played in, or done jobs like that before. He had 32 disposals LDU against West Coast, but 21 of those were handballs, just the 11 kicks. Whereas against Port, he had less of the ball. He only had 24, 6 less disposals, but he had 4 more kicks. So 15 of his 24, he kicked the footy, and he looked more like his old self, or his best version of himself in that Port game, LDU. So I think West Coast were pretty effective at just giving a contest and preventing easy, unpressured ball to their mids. It's a bit of a boring answer, but I think if we can raise our competitive in the midfield and maintain a better balance between ball hunting and defending, rather than man-on-man matchups in this game, I don't think we need lockdown. I think what we need to do is just get that balance right. If I think back to the start of 2024, we saw some signs where we made the contest our priority. That win against the Bulldogs was a really great example of it. We were just combative in the midfield. There was a period in that first half of that season where we're the number one team at stripping the ball off the opposition first position and winning clearance. So we weren't necessarily getting our hands on it first, but we're just obsessive at stripping the opposition of the ball and taking it forward. And we did that not by having bees to the honeypot, but actually just by having one man at a time. So, Duz would go in, and if he didn't win it, then Caldwell would come over the top and he would try and lock it in. And then if he couldn't do it, the next man in. So I just like to see that us get to that balanced structure around stoppage and clearance that we haven't had this year, and one in at a time, and sort of back our teammates to win it, and recognise when they're not, and then go and have a second man in, rather than as I said, that bees to the honeypot approach that is leaving us exposed when we don't win it.
Indeed. Turning to North's forwards, Larky is obviously their main avenue goal and played well despite their loss last week. Mackay, does he get first crack here? And then the other one that really stands out for me is Cam Zerha. He has a good record against Essendon. There's no club that he's kicked more goals against than us in his career. Do we have a defender that is suited to playing on him at the moment? Because he's a matchup that I think we've struggled with in past years. And I look at the side that we've got at the moment, it doesn't really seem to be a great matchup for his type.
No, that doesn't. I think where Jackson Pryor probably just goes back and plays in the role that that Mason Redmond has been playing in as that pseudo third tall defender. I think, and then that means Hooley and Farrow probably rotate through wing and half back. I don't think you want to expose the likes of Johnson or Farrow to someone like Zerha. So I'd actually like to take a bit of a gamble here, mate. I'd play Mackay on Zerha, challenge him to outposition and outmark him. Have Pryor play tall on Coleman Jones. I think, he'll be giving away a lot of height, but, I think in terms of body on body, I kind of think Jackson can go okay on a matchup like that, and then I'd leave Reid on Larkey. They do have another tall down there in Cooper Trembath as well. He's about 193, 194 centimetres. Then you can throw in Curtis and Doveston and Dersmer at ground level. Parker can go forward and take a mark too. So they do have some assets that really can test us, I should say. But I think fundamentally, if we strip this back and be practical about it, Larkey and Zerha are the two that do the damage closest to the goal. They're the two best forwards. Well, Curtis is amongst them, but a different type. I think McGrath needs to take that matchup. But, put our best two taller defenders on their two best marking options in Larkey and Zerha, and that just means Pryor gets the third option, which is Coleman Jones.
Yeah, indeed. And then to our end of the ground, as great as it was to see Hussein get a game at this stage of their careers, we expect him to get getting more output from Jade Gresham, both in terms of the forward line and then Jade's ability to perform up the ground, and then as well as in supporting Isaac. So you're not just leaving sort of that small half forward up the ground play just to him. And then if you look at what North's got in terms of defenders, you've got Toby Pink and Charlie Comben and Aiden Coy's come in this week. It isn't exactly a terrifying tall back combination. So it is a real opportunity for players like Peter Wright and Cole Langford that we've talked about as having underperformed to this stage of this year to find some form. Although for me, I guess whoever Comben ends up on is really going to have to play an unselfish game and try as much as possible to take him away from the play, because he's the one that really stands out as being able to cut off those forward thrusts. If we can keep him away from where the ball is going, it's going to give us the best chance to score.
Yeah, you're right. They don't have a dominant intercept marker. Compton is their number one, but they kind of do share the load. They've been a pretty good intercept mark team so far this season. I think the height equation probably almost means that Comben has to go to right and then Pink to Caddy. Actually, Toby Pink cops a bit of flack from fans, but he is a good reader of the ball. I do think that there's a good player there, but he's around that 193, 194 mark. So the right matchup could really stretch him, or I'd expect it a bit too much. So I think that then creates an opportunity for someone like Cole Langford to then get a matchup like Luke McDonald and get himself dangerous. So, yeah, I think we just need to be aware of who has the best matchup and try and isolate that. So if it's Langford on McDonald, then let's isolate it. Wright needs to get out of the way, take Comben away, get up the ground or lead laterally. If Comben doesn't follow him, then we play through Peter Wright. One thing that we know Wright can do is kick goals from sort of 40 to 50 plus. So hit him up if he's in those areas and he's got good separation on his defender. And then by the same token, if it's Wright that goes to Pink that goes to right, then it's Caddy that needs to get up the ground on Comben, and Langford needs to get out of the way so that we can isolate that matchup. So I'd just like to see us play, again, a really simple team-based game and isolate the player that has the best matchup, and then really use our I want to see our half forwards be really active and proactive in this game, getting up the ground and coming back with the footy. I think on paper, at least, that's a better balanced forward line and forward options through bringing Gresham and Day Wicks into that team than what we've had in prior weeks.
Yeah, indeed. I guess just finally, more from a whole of ground perspective, and what I want to see from the team this week is that we own the corridor. I think the past 2 weeks, it's been really noticeable how wide we've been forced and how easy it's been for opposition to go back through the middle of the ground, because that's where they've had their numbers. So, look, if that means that we get beaten around the wings by North Melbourne, so be it. But I want to make the opposition go a long way around and give ourselves the best chance of taking the ball back the other way.
Yeah, mate, you've nailed it. I don't think this is necessarily a short one to answer, or I guess it is. It's just an intent thing, isn't it? Set up through there, both with and without the ball. Let's look to take the corridor on where we get the opportunity with it by foot, not by hand. And then, and that's where I think the inclusion of Hooley can be really important, because he can break lines through there. And that creates a little bit of chaos in itself that might also help someone like Zach Johnson find more pockets to to hit up some options and those half forwards that can be a bit more dynamic for us. And then, we just, I would really like to see that the lesson learned out of last week is that our mids and our half forwards and half backs are more aware to set up through that part of the ground defensively.
Yeah, indeed. I guess just moving on to our final thought, and Jono, without saying all of them, which Essendon player has the most to redeem from their performance last week?
I think Langford and Parrish for me, mate, they're the two I'd like to see really come out and have big games this week. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it's Peter Wright. I think when he's gone to the ruck, he's okay, but when he's been a forward, it's been really difficult to see him impact. So I think we spoke about the ways in which he could impact the game against North already tonight, and if we start to see some of that, and you start to see him get a bit of swagger back. You know, sometimes you see Peter Wright take a one grab mark, and then there's a bit of a strut as he's walking back to kick the goal. I think if we start seeing that a bit more, then I think it'll be a really good sign for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I like it.
Well, look, that will do us for this evening. As hard as it has been, I'm really excited to get along to Marvel and see what unfolds. As always, we'll be having our pre-game catch-up and drinks at Goat Bar on level 1, so do come along if you can. Thanks for making the time this week, Jono. I know it's been flat out for you at work, so hopefully the Dons can cap off the week for you and put a smile on your face. Any final words from you, mate?
No, thank you, mate. You've held the fort up well, along with a number of our patrons as well this week. So thank you. Look, I do think you and I say this a lot, but it's never as bad as it seems. And I do think we do have a really strong and exciting core of young players coming through that are quite resilient and committed to taking this club forward. It's no surprise to me that on a bad day on Sunday, it was the likes of Caddy and Kako and Roberts and Zach Johnson that did shine. And I think that says a lot about the trajectory of where we're going. I think there's going to be times in 2026 that are going to continue to challenge us as fans, and it's a particularly bitter pill to swallow because we've been having to swallow those pills for a long time now, and it hasn't been fun. But I do think the path that we're walking down is the right one. We've had to invest in the draft and redeveloping and rebuilding our list. And that was always going to get worse before it got better. But I do think there's a bright future on the other side. There's no promises. There's no guarantees in any of that. But I'm still steadfast and confident in the decision makers that we've got at the club and the trajectory or the direction that they're taking us on. So, let's hope for a better response this week and we can get to the footy and enjoy what we're seeing and with a bit of luck have a win on Saturday night and keep that winning streak against this mob going.
Fingers crossed, mate. Well said there. Look, again, that's it for tonight. As always, stay safe, everyone, and go Dons.